Okay, so tonight we're studying chapters 7 and 8, 7 to 9, excuse me, 7 to 9. And it's kind of lumped together because before, there's going to be sort of a flurry after that, okay, because they're going to break up the country. You have a lot of names, a lot of names, a lot of different areas and who gets what, who wins and wins this or that. We're going to study some of that. And then on the 15th, Michael is going to teach that night. I'm going to be gone that Wednesday. And so, and that's going to be about Caleb. And so as we did before, we'll talk a little bit about it in generality and then kind of dive down a little bit into the man Caleb for that study. So this has been we've acknowledged that this has been the central theme or the central verse of Joshua. There may be others that you might think of, but this is the one that I have used, where we find this phrase, be strong and courageous. And we have seen they've had to be that. And tonight I wanted to look at this from a slightly different angle. We've seen them defeat Jericho. We've seen them follow God's lead in doing that. We see the unusual way that God had them fight Jericho. And so tonight we're going to look at this, what happens after that, because it's the next step. And as often happens with us, okay, success generally doesn't always breed success, does it? Sometimes success has the opposite effect. And so we'll talk about that, I think, in chapters 7 and 9. And they learned some very hard, difficult lessons there. And we can learn then from their mistakes and recovery from that. So we find in 7 to 9, there's going to be some disobedience and failure. Okay. Some consequences are going to be dealt out. Okay. There'll be some punishment dealt out. And God will then re-instruct them. There will then be a renewal. Okay, it's not quite as tight a cycle as we will see in Judges, because in Judges we see that this kind of is the cycle, don't we? They get in trouble with the neighboring countries because they worship idols, and then there's a hue and cry. God hears them. God sends a judge saves them. Okay, that's a fairly tight cycle that you go through almost the entire book of Judges following. We have that similar in this case. They are going to make it through this. Okay, they are going to, yes, have some difficulty, but they are going to get through it. We looked at this just to show us where we're at. So they're just barely getting into Canaan, okay, and taking Jericho was obviously the first step. That was the first city based on how they were going to approach taking the land of Canaan. And so they're going to come into central, go north, go south, okay. And so both, and we'll talk about this a little bit tonight, but not much. But the rest of the country, the rest of Canaan, is now going to be, what do you think? On alert, right? I mean, they know what's happening at this time, and so they will begin to plot and try to overcome them, stop them. Tonight, though, they've defeated Jericho, and now it's time to go on to Ai, right? And Ai is a problem for them, and they have some issues with that. So let's see what happens then. So I tried to lay out what we're going to look at. The distance, it seems, between great victory and great defeat is one misstep, right? And that's often the case, isn't it? We even when we study the Civil War, we find, things went well for those that were it was a surprise. Some failure was a surprise. Okay, so Victories and will sometimes breed what? What can it breed in us? Pardon? Arrogance, pride, certainly self-focus, right? It was kind of interesting. I started working for a company called International Harvester. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of them, okay? They used to be a big company. Emphasis on used to be, okay? So their problem became that when everything was going great, they fell apart. When everything was falling apart, they were great. Okay? So what that means is that when we typically waste when things are going well, and we typically focus and we are careful and we follow the law, we follow our procedures and processes to the letter, etc. And so then in that way, as a company, we do great. But we find that same thing, I think, here in this first chapter 7. So Israel disobeys God. We're not going to go into these. We're going to go into each one of these here in a minute. They get defeated. So Ai is a smaller town, much smaller, okay, than Jericho. And so they make a mistake and they get defeated. Joshua is beside himself when that happens. And we're going to talk about that because we sometimes fall into this category. We expect something from God, and when that doesn't happen, we fall apart. And that's kind of what happened there. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Excuse me, not quite done yet. So God then responds in a way that's kind of a fatherly response, right? Joshua's falling apart. God says, "Get up. What are you doing? Get back to where we need to be, and then let's get going." Okay, I might have paraphrased that just a little bit. Sin, Achan is discovered. Okay, Achan is unfortunately an individual that really impacted, Israel at this point. And then his punishment is discussed in the last part. Okay, so Israel disobeys. Now, let's look at, I'm not going to read everything. There's just too many. There's a lot that we could read because this is very detailed and it's a very good read. So I really encourage you to read these 3 chapters several times. But Israel violated the instructions about the things set apart for the Lord. Those things are also called the devoted things, okay? The banned things. Okay? And so Israel violates what God had said about it. And what had he said about it? Don't take any of it. That's not yours, right? He told them what they could take, and he told them what not to take. Okay? And the things that they were not to take were the things that were supposed to be dedicated to God. But a man named Achan had stolen some of these dedicated things, so the Lord was very angry with the Israelites. And Achan, the son of Camari, a descendant of Zimri, son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah. So Achan of the tribe of Judah makes a really big mistake. And he violated, and in his violation, because this was a national requirement, okay, him as an individual caused them all to be punished. They all the result was them all being punished because of Achan's sin. We kind of see this a little bit play out in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians 5, where the man in that church had sinned, taken his father's wife. They were doing nothing about it. They became proud and boastful, mainly by allowing it to happen and remain there. Okay, while the individuals may or may not have sinned, the other people. The effect of the church was impacted by this. And so it's interesting to me, later we'll see the simple words, if you will. Israel has sinned. Here we talk about Israel violated the instructions about the things set apart for the Lord. Okay, basically it could have said, Israel has sinned. Okay, and that's how it's treated. That's how God deals with this issue. And it can have a snowball effect. And so God is very conscious of this. Yes? Yeah, so Ian's saying that they had a contract. They did. They had what's called a covenant that was made with them, right? And so it's being looked at as you're now in breach of your contract, aren't you? And we don't respond well to that today, even today, okay, in our own business world. And God's not going to put up with it when it comes to his law, right? And so because of its strategic location, AI was really a necessary objective. So I say here the next objective, but it was an absolute, right? You had to go by it to get into Canaan, get past that ridge, those mountains that are between where the Jordan is, and the rest of Canaan. So they had to get past that, okay? This word unfaithfully, which is what is kind of referred to here in that first part of that verse, represents a Hebrew word that means to act underhandedly. And that's how we react, don't we? When we find out someone's been underhanded, right? Generally, what does that look like? Well, somebody's hiding something behind your back. Somebody's trying to undermine you. Somebody's trying to put themselves forward over you, etc. And that's kind of what we see here happening, is it not? With both what would happen, or I should say, how God would think of this, and then how Joshua is going to have to deal with this. Being a friend of the world rather than a friend of the Lord, there's a number of ways to look at this, but this is the choice that was made. We're going to talk about this some, because we make these kind of choices, don't we? Sometimes. One misstep leads to the second misstep, to the third. Eventually, we end up paying for that. Right? God held the whole camp of Israel accountable for the act of this sin. Of course, God's worried about multiple things, right? Achan was worried about himself. And yet I do think later we see Joshua looks a little more at the bigger picture, okay? The bigger picture here is they are to be God's nation, and they're breaking into this new land, and God has given them a covenant and told them exactly how to act toward him, and then he failed to do that. What are others going to think, okay, when they see that reaction? Okay. So there was sin in the camp, and God would not continue blessing the nation. So there's too much to talk about right now. There's something a little bit later that we'll get into, but because this is a little early, although all of this kind of comes together fairly quickly, because Joshua never asked God what to do, did he? Did we see Joshua asking God, how should we go take Ai here, How should we do that? Who did he listen to? He listened to his army, who said, this is a much smaller foe, okay? We don't need to worry about it. Let's just send 2,000 or 3,000 men up there, they're going to take care of this. Okay? And of course, we know this is what happens. Approximately 3,000 warriors were sent because of that. He listened to them. And they were soundly defeated. So the men of Ai chased the Israelites from the town gate. Now, can you envision that? They just defeated Jericho, and now they're running away from this smaller town, right? And they killed about 36 of them who were retreating down the slope, and their courage melted away. How quickly we forget, don't we? How quickly we forget victories when we're in the face of defeat. We forget that fairly quickly. And we look around for who to blame. So the defeat of Israel's army at Ai, described here, is the only defeat that we find recorded in Joshua. And the only report of Jews slain in battle. Ai was much smaller. How could such a defeat occur, especially so quickly after, Jericho, etc.? Okay. Probably, if you're Joshua, what would you have been in a hurry to do? You want the next victory, don't you, for God? I mean, maybe, his heart was pure in that way. Okay. He was eager to move forward for the Lord and to take more territory, right? That's what God wanted them to do, was possess the land, and he was kind of in a rush to do that. But he was a little too self-confident, wasn't he? And he rested too much on the victory probably at Jericho. And I'm not saying I would have reacted any different. I'm just saying that he was a man, that's how he thought. I might have thought something similar. Okay. But there's some issues here, right? So there are at least 4 things that became deadly errors, if you will. One is they remained ignorant of the sin of Achan. They did not know that he had done this yet, did they? They did not know. Whether someone was supposed to know, should have known, but had they asked God, should we go to Ai, they would have known, right? They didn't do that. They underestimated the strength of the enemy, which means another way of saying that is they overestimated their own strength, right? That's another way of saying that. They presumed on the Lord. They presumed the Lord would be with them without asking. Right? They never asked them. I mean, think about it just for a moment, though. They had just won the victory, but it was done in a totally non-military manner, right? I mean, you really never would have dreamed that would be how you were going to do that. And yet in this one, they presumed they knew the Lord's mind and they could go and just take care of this for him, God wouldn't have to be involved in it. No. Oh, no, we'll see. They definitely blame God, Joshua really asked God, basically, I'm paraphrasing, what are you doing? What's going on here? The last part of verse 5 says, the hearts of the people were melted and became as water. So this loss here demoralized them, didn't it? This loss. And it created misgivings. It created lack of confidence in the Lord. How quickly their confidence is lost. So where did they seek? As you said, yes, they thought they wanted to blame God. So instead of looking to themselves, would they ever look at themselves? No, they did not look at themselves. Okay. They instead then began to doubt the Lord and wondered, you changed your mind? Are we still supposed to go in this land? How far back are you going to rethink this, okay, if this happens? Well, they went pretty far back, maybe we're not supposed to be doing this, maybe this is not what how we're supposed to handle this. If he had changed his mind, and then they said, maybe they had misread his directions, oh, maybe we just kind of goofed here. Okay. They even asked, should we have crossed the Jordan? Okay. That's offered back. They want to rethink this thing. Okay. So they basically were following their own direction, weren't they? And they were routed as a result of that. Okay. Verse 5 says, so the hearts of the people melted and became as water. That's human nature. Right? First sign of failure or defeat, or maybe doing the same thing and it not working, we begin to doubt. It created misgivings, a lack of confidence. They began to doubt the Lord and asked, should we have stayed in Jordan, on the other side of Jordan? We're quick to become, and we use this word a lot in this world today, we're quickly to become depressed, right? Second guessing the instructions, if you will, discouraged, disoriented. What should I do now? Okay, what direction should I take now? Okay, that's kind of like us, right? I mean, it's not that different than how we think today sometimes. I'm not saying you, I'm saying me, us, okay, maybe. So Joshua's dismay. So Joshua asked God, basically, why have you brought this people here over the Jordan to give us into the hands of the Amorites? Did you do it to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan on the other side? Okay, so this is his way of thinking. Why have you brought us here? Well, today, and there's a lot more around how he acted. We just don't have time to go into it. But today, we don't normally tear our clothes. We don't fall on our face on the ground. We don't throw dust on our heads. Okay, but we show consternation. We show doubt. We may fall on our knees. We may put we may put our face in our hands. Okay, we may sob a few times, and then self-pity comes in, and from that, then we get some depression. We become inactive or sullen. Okay. So, this is a lesson, I think, for us, okay, to see ourselves, kind of a little mirror here, how we might, handle this same thing. Okay, so let's just go through these. Lack of prayer. Okay, so they never talked to God about this. Reliance on human thought, right? What do they say? Oh, it's small, little. Let's just take a few men over there. We'll take care of this. We'll knock it out for God. Relying on their past victory instead of the Lord. Okay. It's kind of the picture we get. But here's what God says, okay? And this is sort of also a lesson for us today. When we don't look at ourselves and we try to blame God, God tells us basically, get up. Why have you fallen on your face? Right? Israel has sinned. They've transgressed my covenant that I commanded them, to Ian's comment back there. And so we see the result of this, right, play out. God cares about our lives, cares about our miseries, but he's explained to us what he expects. He's told us how we need to act, how to respond. He's given us the tools to work with. And I think that in a way that's what he's telling Joshua. I've done all of this for you. Just use what I gave you. Okay? But what? No, he did not. Joshua did not say. Did not look at himself first, right? And so the question here is, I don't think that Joshua was listening, and maybe sometimes the issue is we don't listen, right? So while Joshua's actions were primarily despair, demonstrating hopelessness, okay, and really unbelief in his words, as we already read in verse 7. Okay. The Lord comes back and tells him what to do. Get up, get going. Okay. Why have you fallen on your face? That's a pretty vivid word picture, isn't it? Of him, of how he's reacting to what's happened. Well, that's a terrible color for this. That's supposed to say Israel has sinned, okay, and they've transgressed. All right, so God responds. So in verses 10 to 15 of chapter 7, God responds to him, and he says somebody's taken, of the devoted things, and he wants him to know that and realize that. He could have found that out probably if he had asked God before he ever went. Then there would be a way to find out as they brought things back. But he says this is an outrageous thing. This is how God looks at this. It's not just think about the pile of gold and silver that they got out of the city. And this was a relatively small amount of that, okay? But yet God looks at it as an outrageous thing because it's the principle that's been broken, not the act that's caused it, right? The principle was, do not take the devoted things. And they broke that law. He broke that law. So Joshua rises up and he brings Israel tribe by tribe. God says, we're going to test this. So tribe by tribe, they come before him and they find out who's done this. Okay. Now, some think that they did have a yes or no way. The Thummim, Urim and Thummim was a yes or no kind of reaction that they could get. There's some thought that that's how they found this out. But it's interesting that in verse 20, one too many. In verse 20, Achan answers Joshua. It eventually gets to Achan, okay? And they've gone through all the other tribes, eventually get to Achan, and Achan answers, truly I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and this is, what I did. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful cloak from Shinar, where that's a Babylonian thing, okay? And it evidently was quite coveted, okay? 200 shekels of silver, a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels. Then I coveted them and I took them, and see, they are hidden in the earth inside my tent with the silver underneath, okay? Put the silver underneath, hid the other things with it. This isn't a lot of silver. It's a little more gold, okay? A little more gold, but not a lot of silver. And I tried to figure out, what's this kind of worth today? What would we be selling our soul for today if we were taking these same things, And it seems to come somewhere anywhere from $60,000 to $75,000 even today, okay, in our inflated world today. And so that's not a lot of money to sell your soul, but a lot of people sold it for less than that, I know. But in this case, he's selling his life. Okay, I talked. All right. So Achan is discovered. And I think there are some things we need to pull out of this for ourselves. Okay, one is confession without repentance is not or a genuine change of mind is hollow. Okay. without it, we still kind of harbor an attitude, right, that I'm only going to give so much. Right? I'm only going to go so far in talking about my guilt in this. Right? But that's not the only real issue here. Okay, the other is that sometimes confession is too late to stop the discipline. Right? So the time for this to have been in time to stop it was to not take it, right? Was to be obedient, was to obey. Sometimes even ourselves, by the time we are willing to confess something, now it's gone too long and can't stop the result, right? The result still may impact us. 36 deaths, yes. And I think God would say, yes, that the 36 who died was important, but he would also say breaking the covenant with me was important. You're right. The purpose of confession is to reestablish that fellowship that you broke, right, that you lost. And in this case, they were to turn their lives over to God. And Amos 3:3 says this very succinct thing. Do two walk together unless they have agreed to meet. And that's really what he's saying here. That's what confession is that when two agree to meet in terms of the result. Okay, keeping going, some of the lessons. So Achan seemed dissatisfied, okay, impatient, self-reliant, ironically, okay, and it is ironic. They were headed to getting all of what Achan stole in Ai. Because when they took Jericho, God said, this is banned. You can't take this. But in Ai, he said, you can take this. Okay? So the very thing that he lost his life, will lose his life over, he wouldn't have had to had he been patient instead of impatient, right? Had he sought his satisfaction through God's direction, okay, instead of his own self-reliance, right? Sometimes that can happen to us. Dissatisfaction sometimes will lead us to find unhappiness where we're a little kind of being unjust, right, in our estimations, maybe of other people or how things are being done, et cetera. Coveting something, we see it play out here. We don't always have the greatest example. This is a great example, don't we, of one of God's commands, to not covet, because it went so far as to cost him. Okay, I need to shut up and move. All right, he was believing, okay, trusting, and using his own protective strategies to get what he wanted. So he was after his own stuff, He really didn't care, it appears, to what happened to anyone else. Although, since more than just him died, it appears others might have known about it, okay, if not even been somewhat involved in it. It's hard to know all of that, but it appears that that's the case. The three things that we often seek: security, significance, satisfaction, right? We like to be comfortable in our skin. We like the security of that. We like to be kind of significant, We want to do things that are important. We want to be important, right? And our satisfaction is quite something we quite place quite a value on, don't we? And when that's turned internally instead of putting that on God, is where we see the result of someone like what happened to Achan. Materialism. Okay, we talk about materialism today, don't we? When we kind of cast all else to the side when we're busily after the material things of the world. And it can have a big sway in us, can't it? And it can cause us to do things that we might not want to do otherwise, right? But when we let it have a bigger part of our mind and our will, then sometimes it becomes that problem. We see that in this case. Secularism. I want to be like the world. I want to be just like everyone else. I want everyone else to look at me and think, wow, I want to be like him, and then I want to be like them. Being part of this world. It's a philosophy of life where we seek to live apart from God and our dependence on him. Okay? Secularism. This approbation is we want to be glorified by our fellow man. Okay? We want praise from them. We seek our satisfaction from other people, instead of from God. And so I think that we see this play out. Okay. All right. Now moving into Canaan. Let's see. The battle happens. Now it's a total different strategy. Okay. Kind of an interesting strategy, I think. So the call to battle, strategy for the battle, description of the battle, and pilgrimage after the battle. Very important part after this all ends. Okay, so in the AI incident, God's name had been dishonored among the people, internally and to those who were external. The momentum that Israel had gained because of the victory at Jericho, it's gone. Okay, that momentum is gone. They were filled with gloom and despair at this point. So the story of Ai is a message. It's a warning to them for all time later and for us. Okay? It reminds us that sin cannot be tolerated, cannot be allowed to grow. It hinders the blessings of God. It gets in the way of our relationship with him. And it grieves the Spirit. But it's also a story of hope, because it reminds us that blessing and productivity can come when it's confessed and when it's dealt with. And we see that in this approach to AI. So immediately, the Lord says to Joshua, do not fear and do not be dismayed, which he was pretty low, wasn't he? But there's some things that he needs to remember, right? I need to make sure. Okay, and that is, I'm going to be with you this time. Okay, listen to me. But he has a plan. Take all the fighting men with you and arise and go up to Ai. And what had been their approach? Let's just take let's take a small subset of our army, we'll just go take care of this thing for God, right? So God has a different approach. He says, send them all. All of them are to go. And he says, I have given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city, and his land. And then it's supposed to do to them as they did to those at Jericho. But this time, this is different. Only its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves. Lay an ambush against the city behind it. Okay, I think I have this. It's not here yet. Okay, I've got an image of that. So Joshua and the fighting men arose and they go up to Ai, and he takes 30,000 of the men of mighty valor and sent them there. Okay. Here is what we learn from this. Don't make the same mistake twice. Okay? Use all the fighting men. Don't overestimate yourselves. Okay? Do as I say. And if you do, you get plunder. I'm going to give you the plunder of this. Okay? Turn the place of defeat into the place of victory. Return to the place of defeat, and God's going to turn it into victory for them. The basis of victory is always the same, just as with Jericho. Okay? That is, follow God and his approach. The spoils of victory, were promised. The irony of God's blessing, and that's what I meant when I was saying that had Achan's controlled his dissatisfaction, had he waited, had he had patience, he would not have lost his life. And God leads them with an entirely different strategy. Right? Okay, I want to. All right, this is a new word. They set up an ambush. We use the word ambush today a lot, don't we? I mean, we even talk about ambushing someone in a meeting and things like that. We use that term. One of the first times I've ever heard it here, and it says in verse 12, he took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. Now, I have a map here, and I hope that what I've done to it will help us work through this. The big blue blocks is what I want to focus on. But to kind of show you what's going on here, this is Bethel, all right? This is Ai. The Israelites are going to come into, okay, this area. Here is Israel. Okay. Here is, here is Canaan. Canaan, Israel. Okay. What does he do? He puts men behind the city. He puts men in front of the city. He pretends to run away, like they did in the first battle. They pulls them all out of the city to come fight them. Then the men behind the city come into the city and take it. They realize they've taken the city. Now they turn around to come back, but now they have another army coming down from the north to meet them. Okay. So this is called something, a pincer movement. You ever heard pincer movement? Okay. It was a big deal in World War II, pincer movement. Get people trapped and take them. And that's what happened at Ai. So after this is over, after the battle is done, Joshua leads the Israelites on a spiritual pilgrimage. And he's doing it because Moses had commanded it back in Deuteronomy 27. And he tells them exactly what to do. Do you know what happens? What happens in this pilgrimage? There are two mountaintops here. One is evil. What's the other? Evil, Gerizim. Okay. They have the curses. They hear the curses back and forth. Okay. So this is what Joshua, takes them to here. Okay, I'm going to finish this next week. Not now. I'm going to finish this 9 next week, just so that we can catch ourselves up to going into the land, okay, and to show what happens. Because it's interesting how the leaders react. All right, thank you for everyone.